Leo remembered the feel of Irene's skin better than his own palms. He remembered how she smelled after a shower like cheap strawberry soap mixed with something uniquely hers, warm as fresh milk. Their life was built on those little things, on rituals only they understood. Every morning he brewed coffee in an old sesvi, a small pot they'd bought at a flea market their first year together. The handle had broken off long ago, and Leo used pliers instead, turning the ritual into a solemn act performed by an eccentric priest. Irene would laugh, wrapped in his oversized sweater that smelled like him-like home and calm. They lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the top floor of an old apartment building with windows facing ancient poplars. In summer, cottonwood fluff clogged the screens. In winter, frost-covered branches scraped the glass like fingers begging to come in from the cold. In that apartment, they'd been happy with a quiet, unshowy kind of joy you never see in glossy magazines. Their world was a cozy cocoon woven from books read together, late-night kitchen talks until 3 a.m., arguments over whose turn it was to do dishes, and the soft sound of breathing under one blanket. Leo worked as a restoration architect. He loved the honesty of old buildings. Cracks in walls spoke of shifting foundations. Faded frescoes whispered of decades under harsh sun. He gave them life again, carefully stripping away layers of time to reveal their original intent. He valued that same raw honesty in people, the kind no trendy facade could hide. Irene had it in spades. She was real. When happy, she laughed until crow's feet crinkled her eyes. When angry, she went silent, lips pressed tight. A silence louder than any shout. Then things changed. Not overnight. The shift crept in soft-pawed like a cat. Irene got a new job at a big, flashy company doing something vague but profitable: business process optimization and communication strategy building. Leo didn't understand those words and quietly scorned them. But he was happy for her. She'd wanted more than her modest job at the local library. First came the new vocabulary: synergy, deadline, case study. They sounded alien in their small kitchen amid the smells of coffee and fried potatoes. Then came the new clothes: sharp suits, expensive blouses, high heels that made her taller but somehow less steady. She came home later, exhausted, eyes dull. She no longer smelled of strawberry soap, but of sharp, cold, expensive perfume. Their evening talks grew shorter. She stared at her phone more than into his eyes. Leo understood, or thought he did. New job, stress, pressure to fit in. He tried to be her anchor. Made her cocoa, massaged her shoulders, listened to stories about her boss, Victor P., a genius and tyrant rolled into one. Irene spoke of him with breathless awe, mixing fear and admiration. Leo listened, feeling an invisible glass wall rise between them. He could see her, be near her, but couldn't touch her. The warmth was gone. The company holiday party invitation was the pinnacle of this new life. A party at Victor P.'s country house. You have to come with me, Leo, Irene said, not looking at him as she tried on a new dress, black, shiny, like the scales of some exotic fish. Everyone will be there. It's important for my career. Leo didn't want to go. He hated gatherings where people said things they didn't mean and smiled not because they were happy, but because they had to. He felt like a worn-out armchair mistakenly placed in a sleek modern showroom, but he saw how much it meant to her. He agreed. Victor P. His house looked less like a home and more like a movie set for wealthy lifestyle. Huge windows, white walls, minimalist furniture where every chair cost as much as their car. Soft, bland music played. People murmured over champagne flutes. Everyone was impeccably dressed: men in tailored suits, women in dresses that probably had their own names. Leo, in his only decent jacket and suddenly unfashionable jeans, felt like a ghost from another world. Irene melted into the crowd instantly. She flitted between groups, smiling, saying clever things. Leo watched with pain and surprise. She belonged here. This wasn't his Irene in the oversized sweater. This was Irene V., successful manager, rising star. She'd put on not just a new dress, but a new persona. He took a champagne flute and stood by a window, watching her from afar. There she was, laughing at some polished man's joke, listening intently to a diamond-dripping silver-haired woman. She never once glanced his way, not ignoring him exactly. She just didn't notice him, like he was part of the decor, like that awkward floor lamp in the corner. An hour passed. Leo finished his second champagne. The slight buzz only deepened his sense of isolation. Finally, he saw Irene approach Victor P. and his wife, Alina S. Alina was around 50, with perfect hair, a haughty gaze, and a face so fiercely battling age it had lost all expression. Leo decided this was his chance. He had to make himself known, show Irene he was there, with her. He walked over slowly. "Victor!" "Alina?" Irene chirped. "Our latest project metrics are phenomenal." She saw Leo. For a split second, panic flickered in her eyes. So brief, Leo might have imagined it. "Irene," he said softly, smiling. She turned. Her smile became tight. Polita flight attendant smile. "Oh, Leo," she said, as if spotting an old, barely remembered classmate. "Meet Victor P., my director, and his wife, Alina S." She paused. In that pause hung their entire 10-year life, their kitchen, the poplars outside, their shared blanket. Leo waited for her to say, "This is Leo, my husband, the love of my life, or even just my Leo." Instead, turning back to her boss, she added with a light, apologetic tone, "Leo, we used to work together. At a small office, the lie was monstrous in its simplicity." Leo's breath caught. A small office. That's what she called their life, their cocoon, their world. Alina S. extended a perfectly manicured hand. Her fingers were cold as marble. "Pleasure," she said, her bored voice making it clear the feeling was anything but, and this interaction would last exactly 3 seconds. In that moment, Leo understood, with final, chilling clarity. It wasn't that Irene was embarrassed of him or his unfashionable jacket. It was worse. She hadn't just hidden him. She'd erased him, deleted him from her shiny new biography like a bad draft. In this world she craved, there was no place for him, not even as a memory. Her boss's wife wasn't pretending not to know him. She genuinely didn't know him. Because for Irene, he no longer existed. He didn't remember his reply. Probably some polite mumble. He didn't make a scene, didn't demand answers. Why bother? Everything had been said, louder than words. He just felt a deafening silence inside. The party noise, voices, laughter, clinking glasses vanished. Only emptiness remained. He turned silently, without looking at Irene, her boss, the whole masquerade. He walked through the room, past briefly curious faces, grabbed his jacket. The door clicked shut softly behind him. Outside, the December air was freezing. He breathed it deep. The cold burned his lungs. The sky was clear, scattered with sharp, indifferent stars. He didn't go to the car. He walked, not knowing where, just crunching through snow along the roadside, away from that glowing, fake house. He walked for a long time, past other houses, other windows glowing with warm light, and other lives, real or perhaps also fabricated. He didn't think about Irene. He thought about the old Cesve with the pliers handle, about the creaky floorboard in their hallway, the smell of strawberry soap, those little things he'd thought were love. And he understood. It was gone. Not broken. It had never truly existed for her, just a temporary stop on the way to something better. He didn't return to their apartment that night or the next day. He ignored her calls and texts, first confused, then angry, then desperate. He didn't want to explain. Explanation meant a chance for excuses, for new lies. He was tired of lies. He simply packed his things when she was out. Books, the Cesve, the old sweater that still smelled like her. He left her with her new life, her career, her case studies and synergies. He rented a tiny room on the other side of town, top floor again, window facing bare branches. He kept his job restoring old buildings, sometimes touching a cracked wall or ancient brick. He thought buildings had one huge advantage over people. They could age, crumble, gather dust, But they never betrayed their original design. They stayed honest. Time in his new room flowed differently, not running or flying, but oozing like sap down an old pine slough. Thick, almost imperceptible. The first days, Leo barely slept. He lay on a narrow, creaky sofa, stared at ceiling cracks like cobwebs, and listened to the silence. It was a new silence. In their apartment, silence never existed. There was always sound. The TV mumbling, water in pipes, pages turning, her soft hum as she fell asleep on his shoulder. Here, the silence was absolute, thick as cotton wool. It clogged his ears and pressed on his chest. His world shrank to the room and the route to the restoration workshop. He rose at dawn, washed with icy water without looking in the mirror, put the old Gesvi on a hot plate. He'd brought the pliers. This ritual was his only thread to the past life, but now it felt different. Before it was an act for two, a prelude to a shared day. Now it was just fuel bitter, hot to jump-start his frozen body. The coffee tasted bland. The phone, first ignored, had to be turned off. Her calls and texts flooded in. Seeing her name flash on the screen sent a sickening wave through his chest. He felt no anger. Anger was hot, alive. Inside him everything was cold and dead, like a moonscape. He saw the missed calls, dozens, hundreds, saw fragments of texts on the locked screen. "Leo, where are you? Ay, I don't understand. You're acting like a child. Come back, we need to talk. I love you, you idiot." He accidentally read that last one fully and smiled. A soundless smile, just the corners of his lips. Loved. What a strange, worn-out word, like an old rug with the pattern rubbed off, leaving only grey, colourless backing. Which version of him did she love? The one you could hide in the closet like unwanted junk when important guests came. Work was his only salvation. He arrived earliest, left after dark. They were working on frescoes from a small church being dismantled before a reservoir flooded the area. The frescoes were naive, painted by an unknown artist 3 centuries ago. The saints' faces were simple, peasant-like, with large, startled eyes. They gazed at the world without judgment, with a quiet, eternal question. Leo could spend hours cleaning a tiny patch, scraping away layers of soot and clumsy later overpainting with a scalpel. The painstaking, slow work was like meditation. He lost himself in it completely. The dust of centuries settled on his hands, clothes, in his lungs. He breathed the past, untouched by time. He thought of that nameless artist. What was in his mind as he drew those simple, honest lines? Probably eternity. And Leo, his distant descendant, thought how easily things that seem eternal can be destroyed. A crack in the wall, a leaking roof, one wrong stroke by a restorer, or one word spoken at a party. One betrayal, small and yet so vast it could collapse the entire vault, holding up your life. About a week later, she found him. He was finishing up, wiping tools, about to leave. The workshop door creaked. Leo didn't turn. He knew her step. Light, quick, slightly nervous, the click of expensive heels on dusty concrete. "Leo!" He turned slowly. Irene stood in the doorway. An elegant coat over a tailored pantsuit, perfect hair, flawless makeup, expensive handbag. She smelled of that same perfume, sharp, cold alien. She looked like a visitor from another world, strayed into this realm of dust, time, and quiet. Her eyes darted around shelves of plaster fragments, large boards holding frescoes, his workbench cluttered with tools and solvent jars. Confusion filled her eyes, as if she was seeing his life for the first time. "What is this? Where are you living?" she asked, disgust in her voice. "I work here," he replied evenly. "I looked everywhere for you. I was going crazy." "Why didn't you answer? You could have at least left a note." He looked at her silently. She was beautiful, tired, but very beautiful, with the cold, sharp beauty that money and success bring, but it was the beauty of a statue. Leo felt nothing but the detached interest of an entomologist examining a strange insect. "What happened, Leo? Because of that party? You can't seriously be upset over something so trivial." "Trivial," he smiled inwardly again. "You don't understand the world I'm in now. She stepped closer, her voice dropping, confidential. "There are rules. Victor P. He's very specific. And his wife. She's a snob. I had to present you correctly. It was tactics, strategy. I couldn't say, 'This is my husband, he digs around in old ruins.' They wouldn't have understood." She spoke, but Leo looked past her at the face of a saint with startled eyes. The saint seemed to be listening too. "I did it for us," she continued, voice rising. "For our future, so we could finally get out of our shoebox, buy a proper apartment, vacation in the Maldives instead of, well, wherever. And you just walked out. Like a sulky kid." He looked at her. "You didn't understand, Irene," he said very quietly. His whisper made her flinch. "It wasn't what you said, it's that you could say it." She frowned, falling silent. She still didn't get it. "You called our life a small office," he continued in the same low voice, "and me a former colleague. You didn't just lie. You erased 10 years, everything. You looked at our life, everything we built, and decided it was material you could edit. Cut out the unwanted parts to make the biography prettier. It was just words." She exclaimed, "No." He shook his head. "It was the foundation. You kicked it out. And without a foundation, the house doesn't stand. It collapses. Ours collapsed." She looked at him, and for the first time, something like fear flickered in her eyes. Not fear for him, fear for herself. She was starting to understand this wasn't a game or a tantrum. It was the end. "What do you want, Leo?" she asked, voice trembling. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid. Let's go home and forget this. There's nothing to forget, Irene, and nowhere to go back to. That home is gone. That Leo who lived there is gone too. You cancelled him. Remember?" He picked up his old jacket, smelling of dust and turpentine, walked past her without touching her, headed for the door. "Leo, wait!" she cried after him. Tears choked her voice. "You can't do this to me. To us." He stopped at the door but didn't turn. "Me?" He gave a bitter laugh. "It wasn't me, Irene. It was you. You did it all yourself." He stepped outside into the cold evening and felt relief for the first time that week, like a heavy invisible weight slid off his shoulders. The conversation he dreaded was over. It changed nothing, only confirmed he'd been right. They spoke different languages, they lived in different worlds, and the point of no return had been crossed long before that ill-fated party. The party was just litmus paper, revealing what had already happened. The next months passed in a fog of work. Leo took on a new projecta, dilapidated 19th century manor house. He was restoring the intricate wood carvings in the library. Meticulous work requiring hellish patience. The carved oak panels were worm-eaten, covered in layers of linseed oil and paint. He crouched for hours in the huge cold hall, with its soaring arched windows cleaning tiny curls or leaves. This library became his sanctuary. He thought of the people who'd lived here, who'd read these books, looked through these windows, warmed themselves by the massive tiled fireplace. Their lives were dust now, but their handiwork, these carvings, these books in crumbling bindings, remained. There was comfort in that, something real. He heard nothing more of Irene. He changed his number and the old world ceased to exist. Sometimes late at night, returning to his tiny room, he'd catch himself trying to remember her face, and be surprised to find the features blurring. He remembered the mole above her lip, how she wrinkled her nose when she laughed, but the whole image slipped away like water through fingers. Only phantom pain remained, like in an amputated limb. It faded, then flared anew, especially at night. One day in spring, when the city smelled of thawing snow and wet earth, he bumped into one of her colleagues. A portly, self-satisfied man Leo vaguely remembered from the party. He recognized Leo. "Oh, Leo, hi. We lost track of you," he said, clapping Leo on the shoulder like an old pal. "How are you?" "Irene was worried about you." "I'm fine," Leo answered curtly, trying to move on. "Yeah, well, our Irene's having a rough time." The colleague shook his head sympathetically, ignoring Leo's cues. "That big project she was leading. Tanked. Client walked. Rumor is Victor P. was furious, screamed she'd set him up. Anyway, they sidelined her. Pushing paper now. For pennies. Pity. She had such potential. But that's the game. One wrong step and you're overboard. Tough business. He kept talking, but Leo stopped listening. He looked at the grey spring clouds, feeling no schadenfreude, no pity, just a deep, all-consuming weariness. The story had come full circle. Her shiny world, for which she'd sacrificed theirs, had proved as fragile and fake as stage scenery. It had chewed her up and spat her out, just as she'd tried to spit him out. That evening, Leo stood by his room's window for a long time. Lights came on below. Ordinary city life flowed. He thought about every building he'd restored. Each had an original design, a truth. A restorer's job wasn't to invent something new, but to carefully clean and strengthen what was laid down at the start. He realized that's what he'd been doing these past months. Only he hadn't been restoring a manor house. He'd been restoring himself, layer by layer pain, resentment, disappointment, stripped away to reach his own foundation. To that Leo who loved his honest work, the quiet, and the smell of coffee from the old CESV. And he understood he was almost done. Cracks remained, of course. They always would, like scars on old walls, telling the story of a shaken foundation. But the building of his soul wasn't collapsing anymore. It stood. He took the pliers, hooked the handle of the CESV, and set it on the hot plate. Outside, a soft spring rain began to fall.